It was the moment that made audiences gasp, laugh nervously, and then suddenly realize the joke had gone too far. One infamous scene didn't just spark outrage, it helped slam the door shut on Fawlty Towers at the height of its popularity. What was meant to be razor-sharp satire instead ignited controversy that still echoes decades later. And to this day, fans argue whether that single scene immortalized the show or quietly ended it. The Germans, removed from streaming for racial slurs, 2020 controversy. One of the most controversial chapters in the long legacy of Fawlty Towers did not involve behind-the-scenes feuds or creative clashes, but rather a modern cultural reckoning that unfolded decades after the show originally aired. In June 2020, the classic episode The Germans was temporarily removed from UK TV's streaming platform, igniting widespread debate about comedy, censorship, and how older television should be handled in a rapidly changing social landscape. The decision came amid heightened global conversations about race, representation, and historical accountability. UK TV, a broadcaster owned by the BBC, explained that the episode contained racially offensive language and outdated stereotypes that could be deeply uncomfortable or harmful to contemporary viewers. Central to the controversy were scenes in which Basil Fawlty, played by Cleese, delivers a series of slurs and exaggerated caricatures while attempting, and spectacularly failing, to suppress his prejudices. Although the character's behavior was originally intended as satire, critics argued that intent alone does not erase the impact of such language when viewed outside its original context. When UK TV announced the episode's removal, the response was swift and polarized. Some applauded the move as a responsible step toward acknowledging that certain portrayals, even in beloved classics, no longer align with modern values. They argued that continuing to stream the episode without context risked normalizing harmful language and dismissing the lived experiences of viewers who may find such content offensive or distressing. Others, however, accused the broadcaster of overreach and censorship. Defenders of Fawlty Towers pointed out that Basil Fawlty is clearly portrayed as ignorant, rude, and socially disastrous, and that the humor arises from his own incompetence rather than from endorsing his views. Cleese himself weighed in, emphasizing that the episode was meant to ridicule racism, not promote it, and warning that removing it entirely stripped away crucial context about the show's satirical intent. The controversy also raised broader questions facing the entertainment industry. Should classic shows be altered or restricted to meet modern standards? Is contextualization, such as content warnings or disclaimers, a better solution than removal? And who gets to decide where the line is drawn between historical artifact and unacceptable content? The "don't mention the war" scene, satire or offense? At the center of the controversy surrounding Fawlty Towers' episode The Germans lies one of British television's most quoted and most disputed moments, the legendary "don't mention the war" scene. What was once celebrated as a masterclass in escalating farce has decades later become a cultural fault line in debates about satire, offense, and the limits of comedy. In the scene, Basil Fawlty, played with manic intensity by Cleese, urgently instructs his staff to avoid mentioning World War II while serving a group of visiting German tourists. His warning is delivered with obsessive seriousness, as if uttering the topic itself might trigger an international incident. Yet almost immediately, Basil does exactly what he has forbidden, blurting out references to the war with mounting panic and self-sabotage. Each attempt to correct himself only digs him deeper into embarrassment, culminating in a notorious moment where he performs an exaggerated goose-stepping march in front of the bewildered guests. When the episode first aired in 1975, the sequence was widely understood as a satire of British social awkwardness and unresolved post-war anxieties. The joke, as Cleese and the show's creators intended, was never aimed at Germans as a people, but at Basil himself, a man so riddled with insecurity, prejudice, and misplaced patriotism that he cannot control his own behavior. Basil is not the hero of the scene. He is the butt of the joke, exposed as foolish, outdated, and painfully out of touch. For many viewers, that context remains crucial. Supporters of the episode argue that the humor lies in the absurdity of Basil's obsession with the war and his inability to behave with basic decency. The German guests, by contrast, are calm, polite, and increasingly baffled, reinforcing the idea that Basil's conduct is ridiculous rather than justified. In this reading, the scene is a sharp critique of British insularity and the lingering hangover of wartime identity, not an endorsement of xenophobia. However, as cultural sensitivities evolved, so too did the interpretation of the scene. Critics argue that regardless of intent, the repeated references, slurs, and physical caricature, particularly the goose-stepping, echo imagery and language that can be painful or offensive to modern audiences. In an era more attuned to the impact of representation, the distinction between satirizing prejudice and reproducing its symbols has become increasingly contested. This tension transformed the "don't mention the war" scene from a beloved comic set piece into a lightning rod for debate. Is satire still effective if parts of the audience feel harmed by it? Should historical context excuse material that no longer aligns with contemporary values? Or does removing or restricting such scenes risk erasing important conversations about how societies once laughed, and why? Major Gowen's racist anecdote, the real trigger for removal. While Basil Fawlty's chaotic behavior often draws the most attention in discussions of the Germans, many broadcasters and reviewers later made it clear that the true tipping point for the episode's removal lay elsewhere. The most serious concerns centered on a secondary storyline involving Major Gowen, the elderly former Army officer played by Ballard Berkeley, whose casual racism is presented through a lengthy anecdote that modern audiences find far more difficult to contextualize or dismiss. In the episode, the Major recounts a story about attending a cricket match involving Indian and West Indies teams. As he reminisces, he repeatedly uses overtly racist language, including multiple instances of the N-word and other racial slurs directed at people of color. The dialogue is delivered in the Major's characteristic rambling, detached manner, reinforcing his portrayal as an out-of-touch relic of Britain's colonial past. When the episode originally aired in the mid-1970s, the intention was clear. The Major was not meant to be admired, but exposed as a walking embodiment of ignorance and unexamined prejudice. Within the comedic framework of Fawlty Towers, the Major often functions as a symbol of decaying imperial attitudes, a man frozen in time, clinging to beliefs that even his contemporaries find embarrassing. His racist anecdote was designed to underline how casually such views were once expressed and how unacceptable they appear when placed under the harsh light of modern scrutiny. The joke, as with Basil, is supposed to be on the speaker, not on the people being insulted. However, unlike Basil's exaggerated physical comedy or self-destructive outbursts, the Major's monologue unfolds slowly and without interruption. The slurs are spoken plainly, without immediate pushback from other characters, and without the obvious visual cues of farce that signal satire. For many modern viewers, this creates a different experience altogether, one in which harmful language is repeated at length, even if the broader narrative condemns the speaker's worldview. This distinction proved crucial when UK TV reviewed the episode in 2020. Broadcasters acknowledged that satire was the original intent, but concluded that the cumulative effect of hearing such language, especially racial epithets with a long history of violence and oppression, outweighed the contextual framing. In statements explaining the temporary removal, UK TV emphasized that the Major's dialogue contained terms that were wholly unacceptable today and risked causing real harm, regardless of narrative intent. The controversy highlighted a key dilemma in reassessing older television. Some forms of satire rely on reproducing the very language they seek to criticize. While that approach may have functioned in an earlier era, it sits uneasily with contemporary standards that prioritize the lived impact of words over their comedic purpose. For many critics, the Major's anecdote crossed a line that Basil's antics, however uncomfortable, did not. John Cleese's fight to keep the episode, long before the Germans became the center of a 21st-century streaming controversy, it had already survived a quieter but equally intense battle behind the scenes. During the original production of Fawlty Towers in the mid-1970s, John Cleese found himself in direct conflict with BBC executives who were deeply uneasy about the episode's central premise and, in particular, the now infamous "Don't mention the war" gag. At the time, the BBC was acutely conscious of its international reputation, especially in Europe. Britain's relationship with Germany was still shaped by the memory of World War II, and executives worried that repeated references to the war, even in a comic context, could be interpreted as insulting or inflammatory. Internal discussions reportedly raised concerns that German viewers, broadcasters, or diplomats might view the episode as mocking a nation rather than satirizing British behavior. For a publicly funded broadcaster with global reach, the risk felt real. According to later interviews and production anecdotes, BBC officials urged Cleese and co-writer Connie Booth to soften the script, suggesting the removal or reduction of certain lines and physical gags. The goose-stepping sequence, in particular, set off alarm bells. Executives feared that such visual imagery, however exaggerated, could overshadow the episode's satirical intent and provoke backlash that the network would then be forced to defend. Cleese, however, refused to budge. He argued forcefully that the entire joke rested on Basil Fawlty's stupidity, not on German stereotypes or wartime mockery. Basil, Cleese maintained, was meant to be seen as ridiculous, obsessive, and socially incompetent, a man who cannot stop himself from committing the very faux pas he is desperate to avoid. To dilute that premise, Cleese believed, would gut the episode's comedic engine and betray the show's core philosophy, comedy driven by character failure, not cheap punchlines. In later reflections, Cleese described this period as one of his earliest experiences pushing back against institutional caution. He viewed the BBC's concerns as a form of preemptive self-censorship, motivated more by fear than by an honest reading of the script. To Cleese, the idea that satire must be made safe defeated its purpose. Comedy, he believed, should expose uncomfortable truths, in this case, Britain's lingering war obsessions and cultural awkwardness, rather than politely sidestep them. The irony, of course, is that Cleese's predictions proved both right and wrong. The episode did not trigger international outrage at the time of broadcast and went on to become one of Fawlty Towers' most famous installments, endlessly quoted and replayed for decades. Yet the very concerns the BBC once raised resurfaced years later in a different form, as cultural values shifted and audiences reassessed old material through a modern lens. By 2020, Cleese once again found himself defending the Germans, this time in public statements reacting to its temporary removal from streaming. His position remained unchanged. The episode was never about attacking Germans or minorities, but about skewering ignorance, repression, and social hypocrisy. The fact that similar arguments had been made and resisted during production only reinforced his belief that the controversy was cyclical rather than new. Public backlash and reinstatement with warnings. The removal of the Germans in June 2020 was intended as a cautious, preventative measure, but it quickly escalated into a public relations storm that UK TV could not ignore. What might have passed quietly as an internal content review instead became a flashpoint in the wider cultural debate over censorship, artistic freedom, and how society should engage with problematic material from the past. Almost immediately after the episode disappeared from the streaming lineup, fans, critics, and media commentators pushed back. Many accused UK TV of overreacting and of treating viewers as incapable of understanding satire or historical context. Social media platforms lit up with arguments that removing the episode amounted to rewriting cultural history rather than confronting it honestly. For longtime fans of Fawlty Towers, the absence of one of its most famous episodes felt less like sensitivity and more like erasure. John Cleese emerged as the most prominent and vocal critic of the decision. In interviews and public statements, he described the removal as stupid and accused broadcasters of cowardice in the face of controversy. Cleese argued that the episode explicitly mocks racist and xenophobic attitudes rather than endorsing them, and that eliminating it risked flattening comedy into something toothless and sanitized. He also pointed out the irony that the characters expressing offensive views, Basil Fawlty and Major Gowen, are consistently portrayed as foolish, outdated, and morally bankrupt. The backlash placed UK TV in a difficult position. On one hand, the broadcaster had acted to avoid causing offense. On the other, it now faced criticism for appearing to censor a cornerstone of British television. Within days, it became clear that the decision had sparked exactly the kind of attention the network had hoped to avoid. Editorial pieces questioned whether broadcasters were abandoning nuance in favor of blunt removal, and whether such actions underestimated audiences' ability to engage critically with complex material. In response, UK TV announced a reversal, but not without conditions. The Germans would be reinstated on its streaming service, accompanied by clear content warnings alerting viewers to potentially offensive language and themes. The broadcaster framed this as a compromise, one that allowed the episode to remain accessible while acknowledging that certain elements may be troubling to modern audiences. Rather than pretending the material was harmless, the warning invited viewers to approach it with awareness and context. This decision aligned with a broader trend across the entertainment industry. Streaming platforms and networks increasingly opted for disclaimers, introductions, or content notes rather than outright removal. The approach aimed to preserve historically significant works while also recognizing that cultural standards evolve. In this model, responsibility shifts from censorship to education, allowing viewers to make informed choices about what they watch. The reinstatement did not end the debate, but it did reshape it. For some, the warnings represented a sensible middle ground. For others, they were still an unnecessary concession. Yet the outcome underscored a key reality of modern media. Legacy content exists in dialogue with the present, not frozen in time. What do you think about these infamous movie scenes? Leave us your comments in the section below. We hope you have found this helpful video. Don't forget to leave a like, share, and subscribe to the channel if you like it. Thank you for watching this and see you in the next videos. Goodbye.